In this battle of the Sportsters, we're going to be comparing the Sportster S with the Iron 883, which does not seem like a fair fight given that it's a completely different generation of Sportster. But because Harley Davidson is still selling both items at once, I decided to put the Sportster S in this category of the battle of Sportsters. Hey everybody, this is Chris here from KS Moto Cafe. If you're new to this channel and don't know what the Battle of Sportster is, please go take a look at the playlist of the Battle of Sportsters, where I revisit all the points that I made from my previous reviews of the Sportsters, and then I go over in detail in comparison to my Iron 883. So in this one, we're going to be comparing the Iron 883 to the Sportster S, and I'm going to be going through comfort, performance, style, and skills required to ride this motorcycle, and I'm going to give a score for each one, and then at the end of the entire series we're going to plot it on a chart to show you guys which Sportster comes out on top and what particular Sportster is best fitting for who. So with that said, let's get started. So let's talk about the comfort of the Sportster S. We're going to talk about the comfort of the seat, the rear shocks, wind resistance, and as well as the riding ergonomics. So the Sportster S has a seat height of 28.9 inches, which is about 3.2 taller than the Iron 883. So depending on your height and depending on your inseam, you might be tiptoeing on this. Because I have 30 inches of inseam, I was able to flat foot this bike pretty comfortably, but it is on the higher side in terms of cruisers. The wet weight for this motorcycle is 502 pounds, which for a cruiser weight is actually quite light, especially when it's in the 1250cc category. It's about 62 pounds lighter than my Iron 883, and you're definitely going to feel that when you ride this bike. The rear shocks, it's a mono shock with the piggyback that has 2 inches of travel, which isn't really a lot. And comparing to my dual rear shocks on my Iron 883 that has 1.6 inches, during the test ride, I felt like it bottomed out quite a bit. And I showed that clearly on my review video, and if you haven't seen that, go watch it as well, just so you can get the full aspect of my first-hand impression of riding the Sportster S for the first time. But during the test ride, I was told that the preload wasn't adjusted properly. However, watching some of the owner's reviews and after about a 1 year of release of the Sportster S, I have been noticing that a lot of people talk about how shitty the rear shocks are on the Sportster S. So I think even if I adjusted the preload on the Sportster S, I don't think it's going to perform as well as I thought, and that definitely kind of kicks back on the comfort. In terms of wind resistance, it has slightly less wind resistance compared to the Iron 883 just because it's a lower profile bike. You're leaning a little bit forward, therefore all that wind that's supposed to hit your chest on the Iron 883 is now gone. So it does give you a little bit more comfort when you're riding the Sportster S on the highway. However, when you do go at the higher speeds, which you will naturally do on this bike, you are going to feel a lot of wind compared to any other cruisers or motorcycles out there that has a really good windshield or fairing. And then talking about the riding ergonomics for this motorcycle, as I mentioned, for the wind resistance, it is a lower profile bike, which means that your handlebars are a little bit lower than the Iron 883, and as well, it comes with 4 controls as stock. So if you want the mid control option, you need to pay a little extra for it. But because this handlebars are slightly lower, with the seat height a little bit higher, and with the controls a little bit forward, you have this taco shaped fold, and on the highway or at higher speeds it does play into your benefit because again the wind's not hitting you as much, but it does increase the fatigue on your lower back. The rider's triangle on the Sportster S is definitely not a right triangle compared to my Iron 883, and anytime it's not a right triangle, it does have a little bit more fatigue on my body for longer rides. So overall, I would say for comfort, I'm going to give it a solid 6 out of 10. Not much different from my Iron 883. There are some positives that are better than the Iron 883, but there's also some of the cons that doesn't exist on the Iron 883, like the taco shaped fold. So to me, 6 out of 10 is fair for this bike. Now on to performance. Within this category, we're going to talk about acceleration, cornering, braking, and then as well as highway performance. So this bike has 1250cc liquid-cooled Revolution Max engine that pumps about 94 foot-pounds of torque at 6,000 RPM and 121 horsepower at 7,500 RPM. You couldn't ask for better specs on a Sportster, so that's pretty decent. In terms of brakes, it's got a single disc 4-piston caliper front brakes and a 34-degree lean angle on both sides. So in terms of acceleration, with all that torque and horsepower, it's going to generate a lot of power and it's going to be very fast.
Oh shit! Oh my god! Oh my god! This thing fucking pulls!
Although there is no official speed test on this, I felt like this was a 4-second bike, as in 0 to 60 miles per hour or 0 to 100 kilometers per hour under 4 seconds, and it definitely felt like that. My Iron 883 is tested at 6.3 seconds, so you're buying yourself 2.3 seconds of acceleration, which is phenomenal. It definitely performs better at the higher RPMs, so usually on a Sportster Iron 883, you're redlining around 5,000, 6,000 RPM, but for this bike, it actually performs its best at around 6,000 to 8,000 RPM. So when you go test ride this bike, you do want to test out the higher ranges just to feel that raw acceleration and power from the liquid cooled Revolution Max engine. But just be careful about having those accidental wheelies, because when I was trying this bike and I got a little carried away on the highway, it did lift the front wheels just a tad bit and I had to quickly adjust my throttle. So just be careful about that. In terms of cornering, as I mentioned before, 34-degree lean angle, which is way better than my Iron 83 at 28 degrees. That 6-degree lean angle is crazy improvement. Any traditional Harley rider or cruiser rider will love this bike in terms of nimbleness and its agility to carve the corners. But if you're coming from a sport bike or a naked bike territory, you're gonna find this bike just okay. It's definitely not gonna lean in like your sport bike or a naked bike, but for a cruiser, it is nimble, which is amazing for our Harley Davidson motorcycle. In terms of braking, it's pretty adequate. I mean, I wish it came with the dual disc brakes, but the single disc 4-piston caliper was very adequate for this motorcycle. I didn't feel like it was a safety issue, as I mentioned from my pros and cons before riding the bike, but I do believe that if they did release this motorcycle with dual disc front brakes, I think it would have brought in more customers, because a lot of people compare this motorcycle with Ducati Diavolo or the Indian FTR, which has dual disc brakes. And even though this bike probably don't need the front dual disc brakes, I think by adding it on, you would have brought in a few more customers from different brands, just because it adds a little bit more of that performance look to the motorcycle, which the Sportster S was going for. Now let's talk about the highway performance. As I mentioned before, this thing is fast and it just keeps feeding you that power and speed as you go at the higher RPMs and higher speed. It does come with a 6-speed transmission, which is awesome for a Sportster or any bike for that matter. And on the highway, it was no contest. This bike loves straightaways, it loves turning, it loves pushing forward, and the only thing that's slowing down is really you, because you are getting tired of all that wind and your body starts to fatigue. So overall, I would say performance wise, I was very happy with this Sportster S. I would give it a 9 out of 10. The only reason I'm not giving it a 10 out of 10 is because it's not a perfect bike. If this had dual disc brakes, I would say 10 out of 10 would be very adequate, but because it came with a single disc brake, I'm going to give it a 9. So let's talk about style, the look of the bike, and what kind of rider looks best on this bike, whether you're tall or short, and coming around with the quality of the fit and finish of this motorcycle. So when you're first looking at this motorcycle, it's not the best looking bike. It's kind of a weird mix of different Harleys in different generations put together. I would almost compare it to like a muscular jock with very nerdy look to it, almost like with Harry Potter glasses on it. Just from the look, you can tell that this bike can outperform all the Harleys ever made, but for some reason, it just looks a little odd. And I think the problem is the exhaust. The brushed aluminum exhaust just stands out like a sore thumb, and just the placement of it, I don't know, it just looks weird. But after a while, and after seeing a lot of mods online, when you hide away this exhaust by painting it black, the bike actually actually starts to stand out again as a good looking bike. So I think Harley should have just colored it black and be done with it. I know it would cost maybe a couple $100, but it would have made its first impression so much better if everything was blacked out to hide that hideous thing away. However, we're talking about stock here, and as a stock bike, it's not the best looking bike. Now, what kind of rider looks the best on this? Because it comes with forward controls, I would say that a taller rider probably looks the best on this. I mean, when I say tall, I'm talking about like 5'10 to 6'2. Anything beyond 6'2, I think you're going to feel pretty scrunched up on majority of the cruisers. But between the height of 5'10 and 6'2, I think you'll look pretty decent on this bike. Now, that doesn't mean shorter riders can't ride this or look good in it, but I would suggest that you get the mid-control mod that Harley-Davidson provides from the get-go, which will cost, I think, $500, which is crazy. But if you are a shorter rider, mid-control is definitely more recommended, and I've seen pictures with the shorter riders on the bike with mid-controls, and you look pretty good too. So I think this bike looks good for everybody as long as you have the right controls on the bike itself. Now let's talk about the quality of the fit and finish of this bike. I would say because Harley-Davidson wanted to reduce the weight, it took away a lot of metal parts. So therefore it comes with a lot of plastic, and traditional Harley riders will probably not like that because we like things that likes to rust. But to be honest, I don't have much worries about having plastic on the Sportster S because, again, it matches it with performance and it's easily forgettable. So overall, I would say in terms of style, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. And that's only because it just looks a little awkward. If you get rid of the brushed aluminum exhaust and repaint it to black, then that 7 out of 10 will probably easily jump up to 8.5, 9 out of 10. Yeah, the first impression of this bike does not go well because of that exhaust look. Now, lastly, let's talk about Skillz and what kind of riders can ride this bike confidently and who I think this bike is really meant for. Is this Sportster S new rider friendly? And if you watch my full-on review of this bike, you'll probably know the answer to this. This bike is not very new rider friendly. And I say this because it is a very fast bike for a cruiser.
Like, look at it go. No issues. No issues.
With the exception of the Livewire, which really isn't a Harley-Davidson bike anyways now, this is probably the fastest stock Harley ever made. And for a new rider to hop on this bike and just give her without knowing how to ride, it could be pretty dangerous. I'm not saying you can't do it. I know there's some riders out there who made this their first bike. Good for you. If you're still riding with it and you're enjoying it, that's great. But as a person who started out on the Iron 883 and learned how to ride the bike confidently before jumping onto bigger and faster bikes, I feel like majority of the people don't have that discipline or skill set to just jump on something this fast and be okay with it. This was the first bike that actually got the front wheel end to lift up when I was accelerating. Even the Ducati Monster 1200 did not lift up for me because I usually have a pretty good throttle discipline. And for some reason on the Sportster S, maybe I got carried away a little bit, but the front wheel did lift up and I had to quickly adjust my throttle discipline as I was on the highway. But it did scare me a bit. And that's after 1 year of riding experience. Had I jumped onto this motorcycle as my first bike, I don't know. I think we would have had a different story today. So no, I do not believe this is a good new rider bike, but if you're so determined on it, then I would advise definitely take the MSF course and take it slow. One other thing I didn't really like about this bike, and that is not new rider friendly, was the overly complicated button system that the handlebar has because of the new TFT display. It just comes with way too many buttons and it's pretty distracting as a rider, especially when you're just starting out. You don't need all that distraction to take your eyes off the road. I think this bike is geared towards the intermediate riders who are looking for some speed and performance from a cruiser bike. And that could be someone like me who's had their Iron 883 for over a year and is just looking for some speed and performance, or potentially a rider from the sport bike or a naked bike category that is looking for a cruiser but don't want to give up fully on performance, handling, and speed, because the Sportster S definitely has that quality and performance that you're looking for on a cruiser. I would almost say that Sportster S is more of a sport naked bike in a cruiser body rather than a cruiser trying to be a sport bike. Will this bike upset a lot of diehard Harley fans? Yeah, it's going to upset them because it doesn't feel or sound like a Harley. It really doesn't. It's a new motorcycle. But Harley's not going to care that you don't like this bike because they are not after you. They are after the riders that ride Yamahas, Hondas, Ducatis, any other bike than Harley. They're after those type of riders. And I think Harley did a very good job on releasing this motorcycle to reignite some new interest to Harley Davidson Motorcycle Company. So overall, I would say the Sportster S scores 8 out of 10. What's dragging the score down a bit is definitely the comfort, and another thing that's bringing it down is unfortunately the style. But all these things you can improve pretty quickly with mods that you have to fork up extra for the Harley tax. So by now, if you're still watching this and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please click that like and subscribe button, because every subscription does count, and I appreciate you all for supporting the channel. And if you got anything to say about the Sportster S or your own experience on this bike, please put it in the comments below and I'll be sure to read them all. With that said, ride safe, ride prepared, ride on. Peace.